Hello, my name is Daniel Underwood. Welcome to my garden here in Essex in the southeast of the UK. Over the last 5 years or so, probably about 4.5 years, I've been working on a backyard orchard here, permaculture project, and I've got many different specimens that I'm able to show you. So more and more people are now getting into growing their own fruit at home, which I think is a great thing to do. And there's generally something for most people, regardless of the amount of space you have available to grow in. So what we're going to do is have a look around, and hopefully you can get some ideas and you can implement them into your own garden or indeed at your allotment. This here is a Jubilee plum. It's said to have a better flavour than Victoria and produce bigger fruit. Now, it's also said to be ready about a week or so earlier than Victoria. So one could consider having a Victoria plum and indeed a Jubilee. So you get your Jubilee first and then your Victoria plums. That way you can extend the season. So that can be lovely. This is a self-fertile variety, meaning you can only have one tree and get fruit, and it was raised in Sweden. So quite happy really with how this tree is doing. Now it's put out quite a bit of growth, and plum trees, generally the best time in my opinion to prune them is after the fruit has set. That then allows the tree to heal better to stop silverleaf getting into the tree. Now you don't prune plums during the winter like you do apples or pears. Now some people say that you can prune plum trees in autumn time, late summer. Well, I wouldn't do that. I would generally prune after the fruit has set, and in my experience that's a good time to prune plum trees. So trees looking good. Now with regards to the rootstock, it's on St. Julian A. Now this is a rootstock which should hopefully give you a tree of around 4.5 to 5 metres high, about 14 to 18 feet tall, with a spread of about the same, maybe about 3.5 metres. So this should be quite a nice tree one day. So we shall see how this develops over the coming years. This is apple variety Worcester Pearman, so it's from Worcester in the UK from around the year 1874. Now it's said to be of low vigour, and this would make sense. This tree certainly has not grown that much since I've had it here. Now it doesn't get much sun here, but as it gets bigger, should better get a bit higher and get more sun. So rootstock wise, it's on MM106, which should give me a tree which is about 3 to 4 metres high, hopefully about the same spread, which I think is about 10 to 13 feet, something like that. So looking very much forward to getting some apples off of this year. I had a few apples last year, and it's a nice heritage variety. That could be one thing about growing fruit in your own backyard. You can actually grow fruit that you can't buy in the shops, or indeed maybe harder to find, and that way you can get some nice tastes that you and other people may indeed not be able to experience elsewhere. Both the Jubilee plum and the Worcester Pearman apple I purchased from mail order trees. I believe I planted them in the ground about 3 years ago, and I got them during their period of dormancy, put them in the ground, and they've done well here. Here I have 2 pear trees. Now this is variety Concord. It's a self-fertile variety, and this is on Quince C rootstock, which is actually a dwarfing rootstock. It should produce a tree of about 2.5 to 3 metres, 6 to 10 feet, but you can see it hasn't done this. Now I refer to this as the tree that never grows, because it really has not grown that much. Put up a bit of a shoot I think last year here or the year before, but really doesn't grow much, which is perfectly okay with me because of where it is. So I've owned this tree probably for about 10 years now. It was at another location before here. I planted it in the ground probably about 4 years ago, and does well. It really does produce massive crops for a tree this relatively small size. It was leaning over last year, some of you may remember, and absolutely beautifully lovely, nice tasting pears. Now this here is a pear tree. This is variety Onward, and I was actually given this tree by a gentleman who's sadly no longer with us. He was one of my inspirations, if you will, for really getting into fruit growing. He got me very much into peach growing as well. He gave me this tree, and it's in the ground now. Once again, it was at a previous location, then I had it in a pot for a year or so, and now it's here. So blossomed lovely, and I'm hoping to get some nice fruit from it. So I don't know what rootstock this is on. Now you can see the shape of it. It's shaped like an espalier, which is lovely because it takes up a small space, but yet it gives it plenty of room for the branches to sort of spread, if you will, to produce these lovely flowers and then hopefully fruit. So if you've got a smaller garden or whatever, you could see that you can have a fruit tree in a small garden, and expecting some nice things from this year. Now, you've heard me mention rootstocks, and rootstocks are brilliant because they can help to control the size of the eventual tree, and you can also choose a rootstock that may thrive in your local area, your local conditions. For example, for growing large trees in grass orchards, something like a half standard with apples, MM106 is brilliant. If you've got a smaller space and a smaller tree, something like M26 would be good. Now, don't get overwhelmed with these numbers, because to me, I don't know why they've got these numbers, but they just indeed do have them. So there we are. Something like cherries, you've got rootstocks such as Colt and Gisela 5, I believe. They're all sorts. Citrus have their own as well, and if you think about it, there's quite a lot of rootstocks, so it could get a little bit much if you looked into it too much. Now, I'm going to give you an example here of something called grafting, and what grafting is, it's a way of propagating trees. In this case, this is an apple tree graft. I've made 3 here. This is onto M26 rootstock, so it's a tree that won't be too big. And with regards to M26, they generally require staking. That way, hopefully it won't blow over or get damaged. Now, if you try and grow something like an apple from seed, it generally will not be true to type due to genetic diversity. But by grafting, you can propagate varieties that you like. You can also propagate more than one variety onto a tree, which is brilliant. So I've made actually 2 onto this one here using a form of graft called a cleft graft. And I've got a whole playlist on grafting if you'd like to learn more about that. And a great YouTube channel for grafting and fruit trees in general is the Stephen Hayes Fruitwise channel, so take a look at that one. Now, this variety here, I don't actually know what variety it is. I pruned an apple tree for a customer this year, had some apples off of the tree last year, and I really loved the apple. Really big trees, really big fruit, and nice tangy and also sweet taste, and I wanted one of those in my collection, so I've grafted here. So hopefully within a few years I will get some of that lovely apple, whatever indeed it is. Here I have an apple tree that I've grafted, so I've got 2 varieties onto this rootstock here. It's M26, which, as I stated earlier, is a dwarfing rootstock, and it's actually grown like a cordon, which is brilliant. I didn't make any effort to make it grow like this, it just did, so that's wonderful. And so I've got, this is Winter King here, which is a long keeping apple. It can keep into April, there or thereabouts the following year, if it's stored correctly, and it's otherwise known as Winston, so a nice variety there. And this, I believe, is Lord Lambourne. Now, with regards to grafting apple trees, make sure you make a note of the variety somewhere on the tree or on a notepad or something like that. That way you won't forget. So hopefully I get a nice crop on here. Now, with regards to some apple trees and indeed other fruit trees, you need pollination partners to either help or to indeed give you fruit. So what you can actually do sometimes is graft 2 in the same flowering group onto the same rootstock. That way you only need to have 1 tree, so to speak, and they can cross-pollinate each other, and that can be very good for space saving if you have a small garden. This is a form of cleft graft. I probably did this about 4 or 5 years ago, and it was in another location before here, and it looks really strong. Now, the scions that I used for grafting, the varieties, I got from Stephen Hayes, who I mentioned earlier, and they've done very well here. And great thing about something like this is you can have several trees in a relatively small space like this, and they're not sort of intruding on each other too much. Here up against this fence I have a variety of grape. This is Lakemont seedless. It's a US variety, does incredibly well here. Really sweet, honey sweet grapes, so I can recommend that you grow this variety. Now, this is a southeast facing wall, and grapes do very well in a south-southeast facing location, so they get plenty of sun, make the grapes nice and sweet. And once again, you can see how I've utilised the space here in order to get, in a relatively small area, quite a lot of different varieties. And you can take cuttings from grapes, very easy to propagate, and the vines can get very large, and you really can get some huge crops off of them for they're relatively trouble-free, to be honest. Many people think you can't grow grapes in the UK, but you can indeed do. The Romans grew them here, and there's all sorts of pruning methods. One is called the gala method, but I don't really subscribe to any form of formal pruning, if you will. I just let it sort of trail along this fence. I do prune it, but enough to let the airflow go in so you don't get disease. But basically, yeah, so I do my own thing with it. And of course, if I was a commercial grower, then I'd do what I had to do, but I'm not. And this does very well indeed. So you can look into grapes. They're fully hardy here in the UK. Now, with regards to where you're living in the UK, it could be it is a point to consider. For example, if you're living in a more northern location where it's a little bit cooler in general, a variety such as Suffolk Red could be a good one to look into. Grapes root very readily from cuttings, and I think I took this cutting about 3 or 4 years ago, and you can see just how well it's done. Now, grapes fruit off of growth that comes from the previous year, like little canes. So for example, this growth, a lot of this would have been from last year, and what I'll probably get is canes that come off of this, and that's where the fruit will be this year. And actually this bit here, it broke, and I mended it with a little bit of grafting tape. So learning how to take grapevine cuttings, I've got a video on that. I'll link that one down below for you. So cost-effective gardening, and such wonderful things to grow. Very lovely leaves as well, great fruit, and so many different varieties to look into. You can also grow grapes in containers and pots as well. So yeah, grapes, in my opinion, definitely one that someone who wants to grow fruit in the backyard or at the allotment should look into. You can see where the leaves will come there. Now, grapevines leaf out a little bit later than many fruit trees, so it gives you something to look forward to once your fruit trees have already leafed out. I have here a cherry tree. This is variety Stella, which was the first self-fertile variety of cherry to be introduced to the UK. The year 1968 rings a bell, but don't quote me on that. Check that one out, from British Columbia in Canada. So when one thinks of a cherry tree, they quite often think of a huge, big tree, which of course can present problems with regards to picking, etc. And of course the fact that the birds absolutely love them. It's much easier to net a small tree like this than it is a huge one. In fact, commercially, most cherry trees now are grown in polytunnels to protect them from birds and the weather, etc. Now, this is otherwise known as a minaret. It could be described as a vertical cordon. So I don't know the name of the rootstock that this is grown on. A popular variety of rootstock for cherry trees is called Colt, C-O-L-T, and that will produce a bigger tree. So all sorts of varieties. I've grown the variety Sweetheart before, and if you look around, I think Napoleon is another good one. And yes, plenty of them. Have a look around and see what you like. This is one great thing, once again, about growing your own fruit trees. You can grow what you like, all sorts of different varieties. And great thing about something like this minaret is you can actually grow these in containers because they don't need that much space. I've also heard about people having these sort of like 2 feet together, a metre or so, and grow them quite close together. And what I probably should have done, if I was going to be more regimented with this, was have it more sort of columnar shape, if that's the correct word. But I decided to grow this sort of like a small tree, really. It carried a huge crop last year, it really did. Some of you may remember it. I'm going to link a video down below so you can just look at how much fruit this produced last year. So cherry trees, you can grow those at home, and if you don't have a big garden, you can also grow them in a pot. So lovely things to grow. So I'm actually breaking a gardening rule here. Now you can see there's weeds at the bottom here around where the tree is growing, and with a dwarf rootstock it's generally advised you keep it clear and free of weeds so that the tree's got nothing to compete with. But hey ho, there we go, one cannot do everything, and there it is. And to be honest, it didn't really affect the fruiting too much last year. I don't remember it being weed free. May not quite have had as many as this, but yes, there we are. Now if you're going to allow weeds to grow at the bottom, something like that, you know, something like a larger rootstock like Colt will probably be more forgiving of that. With regards to apples, MM106 will maybe be more forgiving than M26, but once again, one can agonise over everything, and if you do that in gardening, quite often you can end up sort of not doing too much and it really putting you off. So don't stress too much, but just bear little things in mind that you can work on in the future. This is nectarine variety Lord Napier. Now, purchased this tree, I think it was during the dormant season 2019-2020, and lovely tree. It's done really well. It's actually growing in a pot that I've got sunk in the ground here in the polytunnel. So peaches and nectarines can suffer from a condition called peach leaf curl, which is generally brought on by winter rainfall. So what I do is I grow it in this tunnel to protect it. And peaches and nectarines are generally self-fertile, so you only need one of them. Lovely ornamental blossom. You can see this is going over now, but it's sort of like a nice light pinky white colour, and very beautiful trees. It's a 25 to 30 litre pot and sunk in the ground, and you can see this is a good way of growing trees in a polytunnel or indeed outside. And if you're living in rented accommodation, for example, or you're going to move, this way you can keep your trees portable without having to dig them up and the risks involved there. And also the tree can put its roots out through the holes in the pot into the ground beneath and around to absorb additional water and nutrients. And what I need to do actually is just pull it up and loosen it so that the tree doesn't take root into the ground. This here is a gala apple. So many of you may be aware of a sport of this called the royal gala, which you quite often buy from the supermarket. It's a sweet, crunchy apple, and I have a tree of it here, or indeed a gala. That's what it said on the tag. So this tree cost me about, yeah, it's £3.99, probably about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And I had this at a previous location and did very well there. It was in the ground, a good size apple. So I moved it here, planted it in the ground last year. I kept it in a pot for a bit, and probably early summer, late spring last year, it went in the ground there. So we shall see just how it does this year. It's had a year or so to establish. It's coming into flower now, and you can see it fits lovely on the corner here of the polytunnel. You can see the tree is not that big. It's probably just over 6 feet tall, something like that, and I'm expecting it to do well. So once again, a small tree in a garden, and you can have some lovely apples. So we've discussed all sorts of fruit trees. Now, with regards to growing fruit trees, it's very easy to let one's eyes get bigger than their belly. Now, do remember that trees do grow, okay? So that small little tree you've bought may one day be an enormous tree and cause you and other people potential problems, such as subsidence, trees growing over buildings, damage, etc, etc. Now, I'm not saying this to put a dampener on it. I really am for people being enthusiastic about growing their own fruit and growing fruit trees, etc. But as always, caution can be a good thing to do. So maybe get yourself 1 or 2 trees initially. Make sure you look into your root stocks and don't go planting them in places that could cause you or other people problems. And you know, I do know this, working as a gardener, you know, you see and you hear about people putting trees in the wrong place and the subsequent expense and problems at a later date. For example, conifers are always a classic one. You know, you put a little conifer in and a few years later you've got a monstrosity that's causing you and the neighbours quite a bit of annoyance. So anyway, you get to what I'm trying to say: grow fruit trees, grow fruit, but do it sensibly. Anyway, I really could you know, go on for a long time here. There's loads more I could show you if indeed we had more time, but This evening we don't, so there we are. Now, any comments, questions or whatever, please feel free to post those below. I'd love to hear what you're growing at home or your allotment, or indeed even if you're growing them commercially, because I'm legitimately interested in it. I used to work on a fruit farm years ago, and it's still an interest that's sort of with me very much to this day, as you've probably guessed. So if I don't answer your questions straight away, maybe just remind me a week or so later, and I'll try and help you if indeed I can. So there we are. Loads more coming up on this channel, loads of videos, so if you'd like to hear about those when they come out, please feel free to subscribe and hit the bell icon, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Enjoy the remainder of your weekend.